I consider Tacoma my hometown, and Richland, Washington, my hometown from 1 to 10 was Tacoma, and from 10 through 18 was Richland. I've been here for 40 years. Yeah, I came here in 82 in the winter. My dad lived here, and parked in his yard, and he was getting ready to build an addition onto his little cottage, and I thought I could help. So I did. I helped. I stayed there for a year while I was living there in my bus in his front yard. I met my future wife, who was making pizzas and sandwiches in town in Vashon. The first music that I ever played in collaboration with anybody were some guys when I was in college briefly for almost 2 years down in Miami, which was as far as I could get from home, which I figured would keep me from having to go home for holidays and stuff like that, because we didn't have any money. We were poor people. And I had the scholarship money, so I went to Miami. Anyhow, there were guys I met in the student union one day. This is 1962, maybe 63. This guy was a music grad student who was playing viola in the Miami Symphony, and his buddy Rob was a math grad student. They were out on the student union breezeway, at a picnic table kind of setup, and Ronnie, the music guy, Ron Kikasola, was writing 2-part harmonies. And then Rob could read music, so he'd write these harmonies out, and then he'd give the sheet to Rob, and Rob would sing. And then they were singing these songs that Ronnie had picked up from a Richard Dyer Bennett record, which was old English ballad stuff. Well, I knew nothing about any of this. I had just been learning to try to play guitar just maybe the year before I left home, mostly from listening to Kingston Trio records and thinking, well, gosh, I think I could do that. I liked music. My folks liked music. So there was music around me. I mean, I went to Catholic school for a couple of years when I was little, and I'd heard some Gregorian chant and actually done some of that. Being raised, I had a Irish Catholic mother, so I was nominally an Irish Catholic until I left home. Okay. And so here are these guys doing this thing, and I'm sitting across from them and listening to them, watching them happen. And this guy Ron looks at me and he says, "You like this stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I like music. I like those songs, those cool songs. I've heard a couple of those songs." He said, "Oh, I mean, probably on a Burl Ives record, something like that." And he said, "Do you read music?" I said, "No. I'm kind of a quick study. I hear stuff and I can remember it." He says, "Well, okay, we'll try you out." So he writes 3-part harmonies, and he's, the guy was a genius. He really was. He wrote beautiful 3-part harmonies, whatever it was, She Moves Through the Fair, The Cherry Tree Carol, stuff like that. The Great Silky. Anyway, these songs that he was familiar with from this record that he'd bought of Dyer Bennett. And I did learn them really fast. And so we amused ourselves, for maybe an hour there. And that happened 2 or 3 different times. I'd run into them, around lunchtime at the student union. And we'd get together. Rob would sit there and do his math homework in 7 spaces or whatever, some kind of weird shit. I had no idea what it was. And Ronnie would write music and think, I can hear him going. There was a local coffee house in Coral Gables nearby where they had an occasional open mic night. And so Ron decided to go and sign us up to do an open mic, a cappella. So that was my first group music effort outside of Gregorian chant in the 3rd grade. I dropped out of Miami, out of school, at the end of nearly the end of my sophomore year. Just decided that I just wasn't college material somehow. Wasn't my thing. And got a drive-away car and went back home at the time to Richland and spent a few months there and decided that what I always really wanted to do was to work on a tugboat, because I had seen my grandfather in Tacoma had taken me fishing on his boat when I was younger and had taught me a lot. And I had seen tugboats on the Columbia there in Richland, and I thought, that'd be really a cool job. So I went to Portland because that was where the tugboat companies worked out of on the Columbia, also for going out on the ocean. But so I ended up in Portland in the fall of '63 and discovered the catch-22 of working on the water anywhere, that you can have a job if you have a sponsor, or if you've been in the Navy or the Coast Guard or something like that. Otherwise, you can't get a job. You can't get a job like that. So I had a job in a warehouse for a while and discovered another open mic thing going on at the old Cafe Espresso down on 2nd and Clay in Portland. Went down there to play music and kind of fell in love with one of the waitresses who decided she could put up with me. And so we lived together for a couple of years. And I eventually got the gig as a solo player at the Cafe Espresso, for maybe $10 a week and all the coffee I could drink. Maybe it was only $5. I don't remember. Walter Cole was very thrifty man. He knew how to run a business. He had his own place later under his stage name, his drag name. I was doing folk music, and I was learning about folk music. In those days, you could borrow LPs from the Portland Library. So I borrowed records from the library, and I bought a few records. I had Schwerner, Ray, and Glover, these three folk players from Minneapolis. That was kind of famous at the time. And I have to confess, the only record I ever stole in my life, I stole from Gill's music or whatever, Gill's in Portland. It was the Bahamian guitarist Joseph Spence, which I thought was just a cat's pajamas, man. I didn't have it at the library. And that was the only place I'd ever seen it. They had a copy of it there, and I stuck it in my shirt and walked out with it. I felt like a bandit forever. Anyhow, my girlfriend introduced me to music. Her tastes were a little different from mine, but I began to enjoy, Prokofiev, Bartok. She liked good music, and she liked jazz a lot. And she's currently the secretary of the Jazz Society in Sonoma, so she's stayed with it. I was 4F, so I wasn't going to go to Vietnam, but and about a lot of Bible students and conscientious objectors. We were working in the basement and in various parts of the big hospital there in Portland, and I'm trying to remember, not Providence, 23rd and Lovejoy, somewhere up in there. And I was making, minimum wage or a little better maybe. Not too much better, but it was enough to pay the rent and stuff like that. My wife had her job, but she had been to California. She had lived in San Francisco for a while, and she really wanted to go back there, and I'd never been there. So I wanted to go check it out. So we went to the Bay Area together. So that was 65. We lived in a little town, Brisbane, in between San Francisco and South San Francisco, on the dry bay side, and watched the fog roll in over that big bridge on the south of San Francisco. About 4:15, it must be 4:15. Here comes the fog dragon. So we would go to listen to music together sometimes, to open mics or concerts in San Francisco. I had an early shift at the SFO airport, San Bruno, and I decided that we should probably move into the city. And she thought about that. She thought, yeah, that's probably a good idea. We could be in San Francisco. And I found an apartment in the Haight-Ashbury, which was a white Russian neighborhood that was losing population. But, there were still signs that it had been there. Like I could go down to this place on Haight Street and get a bowl of borscht and pierogi for 85 cents. And that was lunch, man. That was awesome lunch. Or I could go over to Post Alley and pay $1.39 for a baked potato and a small T-bone steak. Yeah, prices were different in those days. So I rented this apartment, this flat, in an old building, that 3-story building. And about 3 weeks later, my girlfriend vanished. She ended up in Boston, but I didn't know that. So my apartment was emptied, and it was just at that time that all these guys that I had met or knew from Seattle all showed up at my house. Paul Bassett, Barefoot John Hendricks, and David Coffin. That and Jerry Murray were the original PH Phactor jug band that had broken down in '64, I think, in Boulder, Colorado, and just kind of drifted off to Nevada. And they had been in Virginia City working on the restoration of the Red Dog Saloon there. And that had been complete, and they'd hired the Charlatans to be their house band and stuff like that. So these guys all, they were done with Virginia City and wanted to get out of Dodge. They came to visit. In there, I had a big living room with a couch. I had a spare bedroom. And then after talking to my landlord, I was paying $60 a month for this apartment. For $15 a month more, he let me rent the attic, which was a big, spacious attic. It's bigger than my apartment, actually. Extended a little bit farther to the east, over the hallway and to the next apartment. It was, out of my kitchen, a door into my kitchen on a fire escape, you could go up to the attic. That was how you got there. So John Hendricks, Paul Bassett, and Nick Ogilvy all moved up into my attic. And for a while, Davy Coffin and his girlfriend were living in the bedroom. And then Steve Mork and his sweetie showed up. And David and Kelly were getting ready to split. They were going to go back to Oregon. So I had this bunch of guys that played. So we played, we sat in the living room just probably every evening and played music together. And Nick Ogilvy had a friend, Jerry Anderson, who was booking The Matrix, somebody that he'd met in jail, or I don't know where he'd met him. But anyway, he was an old Portland guy who eventually, I think, was married to Signe. Is that her name? She was the lead singer for the Jefferson Airplane to begin with, before Grace Slick joined them. Signe, is that her name? Signe Tolley. But anyway, Jerry said to Nick, hey man, I need a band in a hurry to open for Lightning Hopkins, because he's going to be here, next week. So Nick comes back and we're playing music together, and he says, hey, you guys, do you think we could take it as a band to open for Lightning Hopkins at the Matrix? Hendricks says, oh, sure, we could do that, and I said, all right, sure, let's do it. So we did. And it got to the point where Lightning even let Nick play harp with him on a few songs, which was pretty sweet. But that was the beginning of PH Phactor #2. Barefoot John Hendricks, who had a lot of instruments, and he wheeled and dealed, man, you wouldn't believe it. He had a J200 Gibson. He had the Gibson Mandola, or Mandocello. He had a Lyons and Healy mandolin, and I'm sure he had some other things too, but that were the main performing stuff. Nick Ogilvy, I learned a lot of guitar from watching Nick play in Portland years earlier. And Nick was a real eclectic guitar player. But he mostly only played harp, and he sang in the jug band. Steve Mork played the jug. Steve had played tuba in an army band in Germany. and was, I don't know, he was the best. He could have hung in there with the guys in on that wonderful recording of that movie, that short movie clip. You probably know the one.
The Whistler's Jug Band.
Whistler's Jug Band. He could have cut it with them. He was really, really good. I've heard Fritz Richmond play. He was better than Fritz. That was Steve. Big Viking, big blonde-haired Viking. Square-jawed, handsome guy. Big, handsome devil. And Paul Bassett on the washboard. Nonpareil. He's good, man. I played harmonica a very little, and I sang a little tiny bit. Mostly I played rhythm guitar while John played mandolin, leads. But I got to play his J200 as my rhythm guitar, which was pretty nice, man. That's a beautiful big guitar. John kind of wished that he had been born in the 30s. You know, that was kind of his idea of when times were right. And, I mean, for a guy that liked to walk around barefoot, you know, with a top hat and a monocle, you know, you got to think that there's something going on here that's very strange. He really did stay barefoot for years. He did not put shoes on and would walk anywhere. He grew up on the Oregon coast. His family owned a huge estate at the mouth of the Salmon River just north of, well, it's Lincoln City today, but it used to be 4 or 5 little towns there. Anyway, that was where he was from, and he was like the baby that nobody expected. His mother was like in her late 40s, and he had a 25-year-old older sister or something like that. And he was brought up kind of all alone. And somehow, whoever was his estate people managed to keep him isolated from the money. But they did set up a thing where he got 2 meals a day at Aggie's Hook and Ladder restaurant in the U District in Seattle, and an apartment. They paid his rent, and they made sure that he could eat. You know, and other than that, I don't think he got much of a actual cash allowance at all. A little bit. But he was very resourceful, and he played music. He busked on the streets, and at one point when he was playing with friends up in BC, up in Victoria and Vancouver, he ended up being Reverend Gary Davis's guide dog, you know, his go with him and see him through doorways and around here, down the alley, and whatever it took. And he really, really loved Gary Davis's guitar style, and he did his best to recreate it. And he got pretty damn good at it. It's funny, sometimes I hear it even more when he's playing the mandolin than I hear when he's playing guitar. When I first met David in '63 in a laundromat in Seattle, and he took me to his house after we decided we really liked each other. And he says, I got this record. You won't believe this record. It's so good. And these guys, I want to learn to play like these guys. And the record was a blues sampler. It had Mississippi John Hurt, Skip James. I mean, you know, and he eventually, he could do Skip James. He could play it. It blew my mind. And he had one of those incredible, you know, automatic thumbs. He could play Mississippi John Hurt too, like nobody's business. And he could also play the banjo, and he did. When we first started, he got out of the jug band thing, and he and his girlfriend left San Francisco before the Phactor really got rolling there. And so he was only on a few gigs there, but he was in the first jug band. And he plays mandolin, banjo, guitar, piano, probably spoons. I don't know. He's a real good musician, all around musician, and really, I don't know, a wonderful guy. Anyway, I was driving Ogilvy's Cadillac. Ogilvy bought a Cadillac in Nevada, even though he didn't have a license, and he finally got a license in the mail. He said, "I'm ready. own this car. I bought it there. Do I get a license?" And they sent him a license. That was all you did in those days, apparently. Anyway, it was a 51 Caddy convertible, and Mork, the irrepressible monster, was sitting up on the back with his feet on the back seat, and sitting up on the outside with the top down, and he's got his girlfriend here and somebody else's girlfriend here, and he's just hooping and hollering, and I got stopped. And I got a ticket for not controlling my passengers. And I remember it really well because the ticket was written on 6/6/66. Very memorable date in my mind. So that was something. Nick had actually gone in the late 50s, had gone back to North Carolina to live like poor people lived in North Carolina, in western North Carolina, because he wanted to experience that. And he and his wife at the time, Mary Alice, who was hooked up with Paul Bissett later, before she died, they were together, and they went back there with a friend and his wife, Mel Lyman, from the Queskin Band, the harp player from the Queskin Band. They were buddies, so they went back there to live together so they could hear people that they'd heard these recordings of. Mary Alice's family, her dad was like John Hammond on the other coast, had this incredible catalog of vocalion and blues, old blues recordings, 78s from way back. So she introduced Nick to a lot of this stuff, and he picked it right up. He loved it. And he and Steve were pretty tight at various times, and so the two of them had learned some of those songs. And John Hendricks had also picked up on it to some degree. What did we play? We played a lot of Memphis Jug Band, actually. Casey Moan, Minglewood, some Gus Cannon stuff too. That was mostly it, and the only originals that we did were the things like the tune that Every Woman's Loving Man, that John, the Barefoot John thing, was a song that Steve had written. Steve had been an English major at UW. I think maybe he even had a degree, and he could write. He had some great ideas, but it was mostly those kind of things. We did a few novelty tunes, like Little Red Riding Hood, and we did a couple of songs from like Searchin', from who did that? Another West Coast novelty song group. The guys that did Poison Ivy and Charlie Browne, and but we did a couple of those songs. I think we did a couple of Hicks tunes too, and I know that we did a song that Nick and Steve had worked out, where we actually did the thing that the Beatles did on one of their tunes, where we dropped into 3/4 time in the middle of it, and then went back to 4/4. Not too many gimmicky things though, mostly pretty straight ahead stuff. I know there were a couple of tunes from one of the other jug bands too, or other, traditional bands, traditional music, Appalachian stuff. I learned some 50s stuff that I really liked off of the radio. There's a song by some guys called the Jive Bombers, and I think they were black. Anyway, they had this song Bad Boy that they recorded in about 57, and I still play that one today sometimes, and it's just a really fun, goofy song that points out some things like it's good to stay out of the sun, stay in the shade as much as you can, don't get your head in a sunburn attitude. Also, watch out for the cops, because they could be a problem. We had this novelty tune, Merryjuana, which was basically, like the Christmas jingle, that we co-opted the music from, we want some marijuana, we want some marijuana, we want some marijuana, so bring it right here. We won't go until we get some, etc., etc. The first time that I remember us singing that in public, the second time, the first time we did it down at the FW Coup Memorial Auditorium, and got some laughs, the guys at the bar, But the second time we did it at San Francisco State College in their gym on a stage for setting up for some kind of event. The place was packed with students. And way back against the far wall, the actual principal speaker for the event, which is Art Linkletter, whose daughter, I think, had just died from a bad acid trip or something, some kind of scary thing had gone on with her. And there were 2 or 3 cops back there, and he was talking to the cops on the back wall. And as we're finishing our act, Hendrix strikes up, "We want some marijuana." And we all just, okay, we went along with it. We played behind him, and we did the thing. People were throwing joints from out of the audience, and pretty soon there were 10 or 11, pinners and a couple of stogies there, man. And as soon as that happens, Hendrix is running around gathering them all up and putting them in his hat, And I see these cops moving toward the exits, and Art Linkletter just looking aghast back there, like he's going to tear his hair out. And fortunately, the doors that didn't go through to the school were right behind us and went out to the alley. And Mork finally got a hold of Hendrix by the back of his shirt. "Come on, John, we got to go." And we booked that there. When it was an acoustic gig, we didn't have a sound system. We didn't have to worry about anything. That was all theirs, their sound system. It was like the old jug bands, man. We can run for it if we have to. You're not carrying a bull fiddle. I got this jug and I'm going to go. So we went. We hit the door and we were out there and got in the car and sped away and no heat came. And we ended up with, a dozen joints from the responsive crowd, which was really sweet. In those days, it was a lot of pot. We did it totally on the fly and as we felt worth doing, and everybody was ad-libbing. There were never any studied actual rehearsals of harmony parts. It was just, you can sing harmony on this, okay, and we did. Fortunately, I have a good ear for that, and Ogilvy had a good ear for that. So it was usually we could come up with something, and actually, if it worked a time or two, then we would more or less kind of remember our parts, which is kind of the same way that we have done with Richard Cranium and the Phoreheads. We hardly ever, sometimes Spud might say, I'll do the thirds, you do the fifths, so whatever. That's about as much instructions as we've ever had on any kind of harmony singing. So that was where that was at. I'm sorry that I don't have more of the songs from a set list in my head. I wish that I did. You get the idea. We played a lot of mostly traditional stuff from the 30s to the 50s. Hardly anything modern at all. I don't think we did a modern, Most of the things that we did were stuff that I had to learn because I wasn't familiar with them. I wasn't really familiar with jug band music as a category until hooking up with the PH Phactor. And now some of those songs are, my very favorite. Casey Moan, man, it doesn't get any better than that. It's good, I love that kind of stuff. And I like some of the really up stuff that they do. The guy that lived in the apartment in the front of it on my floor was a guy with a 12-string, electric 12-string named Phil Hammond. And Phil later got involved with the Family Dog. There was a picture in, I don't remember, maybe Look magazine or, not Life, but one of those big shiny magazines from the 60s. There's a picture of the Family Dog sitting around. Chet Helms was kind of in the middle, like inside this pyramid. At the top of the pyramid was Phil Hammond. Phil listened to us play, and he wanted to be our manager. So he went out and did it. While we were in San Francisco for probably the 6 or 7 months that we were a band in San Francisco, he was our manager and gig promoter. And we played a lot of, we played the Fillmore, we played Winterland, and maybe our most fun gig was played a place in North Beach next to the spaghetti factory. the wife of one of the Kingston trio, Nick, what's his name's wife, owned it. And it was what was the name of it? It was a weird name, like the WQ Memorial Auditorium or something like that. Anyway, there was a group there that did theater, that did, 3 guys that did these skits from John Lennon's 2 books that were just masterful. They were called the Congress of Wonders. And they eventually got sued by Apple because they for violating copyright or something like that. But they were hysterical, man. They were so good. They do these, things from in his own right or a spanner in the works that were just knockout. I mean, just incredibly. They were really good. I mean, it was like improv, but they had it pretty much sketched out how they were going to do it, and. Yeah, they were great. They would play there sometimes when we were there, and sometimes Dan Hicks would come down and play just Dan Hicks alone with an acoustic guitar, and sing his own stuff. And that's kind of how I actually became familiar with Dan and his stuff. That and I briefly dated a woman who was renting a room in the apartment that he and his girlfriend had down there, and witnessed some interesting goings on. Anyway, I liked Dan. I mean, he was planning to be a curmudgeon from the time he was in his 20s, I think. He wanted to be a curmudgeon. And it showed right away, when you'd see the Charlatans, one of their pictures, you'd see, here's these 3 guys dressed up. Their piano player was a picker at, Goodwills and stuff, and he had exquisite taste. He was really good, especially with the clothes. And, they're all decked out like, 1895 dandies, like the gunslinger turned croupier, or, they look great. And here's Hicks in a, 1920s Letterman sweater, and a megaphone. I mean, he should have had pom-poms. He looked like a college cheerleader from the 20s or 30s, and just totally out of character with the rest of them. That was Hicks at heart. Oh man, what a guy! And he wrote some great songs. You know that. We got a gig that I cannot find any proof that we were actually there. I've looked and researched this, and I can't find any iota of anything, but I know we were there because I was there. That's happened a couple of times in different things, but that I have personal knowledge of, because I wasn't loaded all the time, and even then it didn't always matter. Your memory doesn't go away. So we played at a gig at the Fillmore where we opened for the Mothers of Invention, who Bill Graham had asked to open for Lenny Bruce. And it was about maybe within 2 or 3 weeks of Lenny Bruce going out. This is like late summer, like July probably. Zappa told him that, yeah, we'll open for Lenny Bruce if you'll find a jug band to open for us. We were the only jug band in town. So Phil got that gig for us, and we were there. We played, we did it. And then we got to hear a little Lenny Bruce, too, and the Mothers, which was extraordinary. Phil was good. He got us a gig one time in the Bears Lair at UCal in Berkeley. And I don't remember if that's the one where we had to join the union to get. No, that was a TV commercial. We did a 8-minute commercial for somebody that they wanted a jug band. And we had to join the union to do it. But they actually paid us each $20 to do this 8 minutes. I mean, it was the most money I'd ever made per hour in my life. It was like off the chart. This is awesome. I love it. Even if I had to pay the union $15 to join, it's okay. Oh, that was fun. So the band kept getting gigs. I had quit my job at the airport and was still able to pay money. We were encouraged to become electric or electrified to some degree. I think our manager, Phil, was encouraging us because that was what he was hearing. And Steve, the jug player, eventually did play bass. You know, he would play bass when we were doing that. And Paul learned to play the drums, you know, trap drums, which was quite, I thought, quite an accomplishment. He had it in his head to do it because he played washboard, and his washboard is real subtle. He's not a very loud washboard player, but he's subtle, and you know, he knows he can swing. He's good that way. We played with the Dead a few different times. We opened for the Dead at gigs in Portland State, and also went on the road with them up to Canada, to Vancouver, Canada, and we opened for them when they were on a tour. They were playing at the PNE grounds up there, which is like their big fairground thing. With the Quicksilver Messenger service is also along on that weekend. I think we did a like 2 or 3 day weekend. We got invited to a big party when they moved. They moved from town. They were living in town. They had a house in town. Maybe they kept the house even after they moved to this rancho place, this big rolling estate with these adobe buildings and a swimming pool and a 10-acre lawn and, you know, gorgeously landscaped place. They were having like a housewarming, so we were there. A whole bunch of local bands were all invited to come out and hang, and so they did, and, you know, and there were even a couple of BBC reporters there, you know, guys walking around in, you know, suits and ties with a camera, and I think they did 16 millimeter of this event, you know, with a portable camera. I would love to know what they got to see because it was extraordinary. So we spent the night there, you know, after, you know, people played in the evening, and then people went swimming, goofed around the lawn. People were jamming over by the building all day at various times. And in the evening, we got together and played some, and then somebody, maybe Tangerine and some other woman, fixed up something to eat, so we had some food to eat. I remember borrowing Pigpen's Jeep to go out and look into the chaparral and find more wood for the fire because we wanted to have, you know, a bonfire. And so I did. I don't know how he trusted me. I had a Jeep, so I knew how to drive one. But it had been confiscated by the police, I think, at that point. We left San Francisco in the fall of '66, came to Portland. We worked out of Portland for nearly another year. Some of that time, in '67, we moved up to Seattle, and long enough to record the one album that we made for Jerry Denon, a guy who owned a couple of radio stations and, you know, was looking for talent to record, you know, so he could have a catalog. We had Hank Pander had made a beautiful triptych backdrop for us to play in front of, like, you know, folding screens. And that was going to be on the cover of this thing, and it was going to be like a open book kind of a CD or a LP with pictures of us from inside and a bunch of history and stuff like that. Never happened because Denon decided to sell his holdings, and I don't know, maybe he was being sued or something, but he just sold off the radio stations and his whole catalog, and it ended up getting picked up eventually by Piccadilly in, I think, Denmark, who published it as an LP. And that's where our one record came from. And it wasn't, in my opinion, the best stuff that was recorded, but it was what he thought would sell. Mork had rented a rehearsal place as you're going over the Burnside Bridge from town, and there are a couple of doors before you actually get up on the bridge that are places that have rooms behind them. He had rented one of those to rehearse in. So we did. We actually got together and we're going to rehearse enough to, you know, do the album the way we wanted to do one, an all-acoustic album. And but everybody was really kind of stressed out. I was actually pretty enthusiastic about it. I thought, you know, I'd written a song that I thought we could record. And that freaked Nick out. He didn't want to do anything that wasn't traditional. Hendrix was okay with it. Steve was okay with it, but Nick was not okay with it. And you can see this in one of our old posters, this classic thing where you had, well, it wasn't always that way, but it was like there was Nick and John and Steve on one side and Paul and me on the other side. That was kind of a basic split that existed, that persisted through the history of the band. John could go either way depending, but you never knew what it was, and whatever it was in stone, you know. It was like, he did not change his mind about things very easily. So he and Nick had a love-hate relationship for the entire time that the band was a band. And Steve was often the peacemaker in that particular area because he was the tightest with Nick. And they were the oldest guys in the band. They were the guys born in the 30s, you know. Bassett was born, I think, in 1940, and I was born in 43. John was born, I think, in 47 or 48. He was the youngest person. And we didn't have any gigs lined up or showing up. So this was a deal, and Steve had made payment for this room for a little while, but not forever. And it just kind of got where we quit showing up, and he killed the rent on it. So we weren't doing anything. And it may have been that year that John and I got this gig here that winter, after the band had pretty much dissolved. It wasn't a living entity anymore.
All right, tell us about the post.
Okay, yeah, this was Christmas Eve at the old church at 11th and Clay, 11th and Southwest Clay in Portland. Me and Barefoot John Hendricks, John D. Hendricks. And I'm not sure who did this poster, but it was very clever. I like the reward and how somebody had the or else, be there, you know, so don't miss it, or else. Like it would look like somebody did it with bullets and a smoking pistol over there. Pretty bad. Yeah, I'm not sure who made that poster. I checked with Paul, and I don't think Paul did it. I wish I had some real authentic posters or handbills from those gigs in those days. Paul has some, yeah. He is an artist, and that's part of the deal. I knew Stu from after the PH Phactor had disbanded in the 60s, and I was still in Portland. John Hendricks and Stu and John Ward had a band that they were playing jug band music, and I played with them a little bit. In '67, I traveled with them down to the Bay Area to be part of some kind of one of the Summer of Love concerts down there. Still remember that real well. Man, Stu's a great musician. He's a good dude. The next year, in '68, was the year that a whole bunch of us got movie extra jobs on the Paint Your Wagon movie in the Wallowas in eastern Oregon. Nick was along on that. I don't remember if Steve was, but John Ward was along. Davey Coffin was along. A lot of people went up there, and we were getting $25 a day to be extras, which in those days was like manna from heaven. Whoa! Plus they fed us. Plus they had clothes for us to wear. So plus we worked maybe 25 minutes in an 8-hour day, a movie shoot. They spend 3 hours getting the shot ready and hoping that the weather holds, and then these guys with big reflectors go out and stand around and, and get ready for it. And bam! Okay, do it again. Bam! Oh, that's it. 5 minutes. And away you go. That's the movie business. That's how we do things. Man, it was just amazing to me. It was an interesting time, though. I think Nick got into going into town, which was in, Baker City, which was a long ways from what we were camped on the way up in the National Forest. And at one point, I actually hiked over the Eagle Cap Wilderness area to go see the rodeo on the other side, over in the town by the lake, over there on the other side. I'm trying to remember that name of that town. But anyway, I went up, spent the night up in the wilderness area. After I went up on top of the nearest high prominence, which was more like just walking up a hill. It wasn't like going up a mountain, but it was, 10, 11,000 feet, something way up there. And I could see this mountain over there that they called Matterhorn. So I walked across the wilderness area in my tennis shoes, and I had the gunny sack that I had rigged myself a backpack so I could carry my sleeping bag in it. And I had a map of the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest, and walked over to the other side where the rodeo was and saw some real Indians, and they were not very friendly. And I understood why, and as I get older, I understand even more why. It was quite an adventure, I mean, the very first day we were there, we had a big gathering at a fire pit that somebody had made, where there was room for 20 or 30 people to get around this big, probably a 6-foot across fire pit. So Chuck Whiteley and a few other people had gotten together and made a big bonfire, and we all got together in the evening when Dennis Long was there and Mickey were there, and all of a sudden there's like things are flying through the air, and somebody yelled, I think it was Dennis, yelled, get down, there's live rounds in that fire pit. So everybody gets down, while somebody had thrown a handful of .22 shells into the fire pit, and they came screaming out there. Didn't hit anybody, but it was wild for about, probably 2 minutes of, and finally, after about 10 minutes, and there wasn't a shot going off, and everybody sat back up. I mean, that was dirty pool. I didn't like that, somebody's bad trick. Johnnie Ward was along on that movie trip in '68 and I remember watching him at somebody's taunt. He picked up a rock and he was going to throw it at a grouse, and it was 30, 40 feet away off the edge of the road, and I don't remember who was it. Somebody said, "Oh, Ward, you won't even hit the ground with that thing," and John threw a rock at this grouse, hit it in the head, and killed it. He was an inveterate outdoorsman, despite what you might think, from checking him out. But he liked to hunt and fish. When I lived down in Walport, he came down one time with one of those double paperboy bags full of duck decoys, and set up out in front on the mudflat. I lived right on the bay, and he set up out there and to hunt and do some bird shooting. Anyway, when we were down we were all at the Wallowa movie site, he had like 3 fishing rods with him. He had a fly rod and a couple of spinning reels rods. I borrowed the fly rod from him because I made my camp right where the West Eagle came into Eagle Creek, and there was a good spot there. So I was going to fish there. I didn't have a license, but he did. He had a fishing license. At one point, one evening, I'm sitting naked in my campsite there with a fire going, and I think there was a young woman there that also may have been naked, and I just heard something. I looked over, and I see these boots. Oh boy, that's a state trooper. As a state trooper, he's also a game warden in Oregon. The state police are also the game wardens. He said, I see you got a fishing rod over there. Is that yours? I said, no, it belongs to John Ward. And he leaned back and he rolled his eyes and he says, oh, for Christ's sake. He said, I've talked to 2 other people out here in this camp that have fishing gear with them. And all these fishing rods belong to John Ward? I said, I think so. I think they do. Do you have a license? I don't have a license. I don't fish. I just keep it there so John will have a rod when he comes over here. He doesn't have to bring his fishing pole. That does it. And he just turned around and he left. We played a lot in tents in between shows, and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was up there at the time, so we played along with them. They came, and we all played together sometimes, or one or two of us would go over and jam with them. And that was kind of fun. I remember Gene Seberg, who was one of the stars, came and checked us out one time in our tent, and got bug-eyed with amazement, and said that she didn't know about that what kind of music is that? And actually Lee Marvin, who was also in the movie, came and listened to us one day, and he said, he was talking to Nick, and he says, you know, that song, when I was a kid, that song right there was my favorite song on the radio. He grew up in Missouri, I think, somewhere along the river in the Midwest. And it was Casey Moment. As a teenager, he said that was the best music that I could think of. He said, I always remember hearing that. Carmen talked me into being, Turtle's wife talked me into being in Richard Cranium after Billy Holtz died. And she asked me one time, I was in Portland, she said, do you think you could play a washboard? I want to get this band going again that Turtle really liked. And I said, I'd try. I'd give it a try. So I did, and our very first gig was in a driveway in a park, not in a suburb, some suburban driveway outside of Portland. I don't know if it was Beaverton or not. But we played in this driveway for this family having a reunion or some kind of do, and that was our first gig together. And I'm trying to remember the year that was, but it was, boy, it's funny. The stuff that's up close is so much foggier than the stuff that was far away. Anyway, Carmen, who liked to do the booking for anything Turtle was involved in, and that was maybe 4 or 5 different things. He was playing with the horn player at the Oyster Bar every week, a box of chocolates, I think, for brunch. And he was playing with the Freak Mountain Ramblers. And he was playing, well, later he was playing with the Guitar Mafia and another band that I think his daughter was in for a while. And I mean, he was busy. She had him going all the time. And finally he quit his meat cutting gig with New Seasons, I think it was, one of the New Seasons markets, and just went with the music, kind of retired and going full-time music again. I'd played music with Spud Siegel years ago with Spud and his brother Kid at a wedding reception for a Hodad marriage down in Newport, and I played a rhythm thing then. It wasn't a washboard, but I rigged up a kind of one of those kind of a serving table-like thing, and it had a cake rack on it with a 6-inch pie pan and a spoon, and I could make it sound just like a hi-hat, like. So I did that for, 3 hours. And that was when I met Spud and his brother. So I knew them before I had played in the Phoreheads. That was in the late 70s. And the Phoreheads thing didn't really start going on until the 2000s. And I didn't meet Dave Reich until the first gig that we played with Dave. I'm trying to remember where that was. It may have been at the Laurel first, where he came and played bass. And back in the days when he was still driving a Valiant, I think he had 2 or 3 of them up at his place on Freak Mountain. He was living in a school bus. We had a lot of instant rapport because of that, because I'd lived in a school bus for 5 years, and he was up there living in a retired green tortoise shell. And we both made homebrew. We both had a lot in common, and musically too. That was kind of the heart of the band right there, the 4 of us. And later on, Lynn Conover kind of I think Carmen wanted to have, she thought we needed a woman to be in there with us, to give us some better texture as a band. I don't know, better selling point. And that didn't bother me. I mean, I liked what she did, and she also played in 2 or 3 bands. And we do stuff like, Satisfied, You May Go, But This Will Bring You Back, and a couple of other of the Memphis Jug Band songs. Musically, I'm not up to very much. I play an occasional standalone gig at places here on Vashon, and I'll be playing on the 14th on Valentine's Day for the Turtle Appreciation Evening that we're having at the White Eagle. I've been playing with a band in that out of Duval here in East King County. We play some jug band stuff. I just saw a set list here from the stuff we do. We do, you know, kind of all over the board. A little gospel, a little Memphis jug band, a little Cab Calloway, you know, and sometimes with a tub player. I'd play washboard sometimes, or guitar sometimes, or harp sometimes. They call themselves the Poindexters. Sometimes, a couple of times, we changed our name to Bubba Doom, and another alter ego there was Home Before Dark. But you know, it's a bunch of guys, mostly my age or close to my age, and well, except for, you know, a couple of youngsters in their early 60s. And we played weddings, taverns, various gigs, at some social events and some straight just music gigs. But, you know, I have played so little that I'm running out of calluses on this hand, and I'm going to have to get back to it. I'm mostly, you know, it's wintertime, which means I spend a lot of time cuddled up to my wood stove and in the kitchen listening to the bad news from all over the world, and occasionally a little music. You know, I've got a lot of good recorded music, and I hardly ever listen to any of it. I don't know, it's just something I never got in the habit of doing. But and unless I was trying to learn a song, maybe. I have a notebook back there with songs that I've written down, the lyrics to, that I intended to learn or that I have learned, that are everywhere from, well, some of them are Beatles songs, some of them are, what are they? Like Stardust. And in the band with Turtle and those guys, I played that song sometimes. I forced them to go along with me there. And or, you know, Begin to Begin, stuff like that, you know, some stuff that kind of technical, you know, it's got more than 5 chord changes in it. It's scary. There's a mandolin here that I occasionally pick up to play along with something that strikes my fancy. And I'm, you know, learning my way around it slowly. But yeah, I mostly play guitar. And actually, once in a while, I'll get the washboard out just because I feel like it and play along with something on the washboard. And I have a bag full of harps. Once in a while, I'll play the harp too, just to remember how to do it. See if I still remember how to breathe. And I have a banjo, but I haven't been playing it very much. I played it a few days ago for a little while. I had a job in a sound, as part of the sound production for a show at the what I call the Opera House. The Vashon Center for the Arts has this beautiful multi-million-dollar wide, deep stage setup, and a woman here on the island wrote up a program of scary fairy tales, or, you know, culture stories. The Appalachian story called for a guy playing banjo. So I played the banjo while the guy on stage was playing the banjo. I was part of the sound crew, so I was, you didn't see me. I did another show there doing a couple of Woody Guthrie songs for a show, this woman whose parents grew up in the Dust Bowl. She wrote a story about those days and how they left and what life was like there, and put it on stage as a kind of a dialogue with music. And I played some guitar on that and sang a couple of Woody Guthrie songs about the greatest Dust Bowl that ever come down the line, you know, one of those good songs. I intend to play more this summer with any luck. That'll come to terms with, you know, I assume that I'll live till then, because in about 6 weeks I'll be kicking 80. Dear God. When my high school class was having a 50th reunion, and they wanted to hear what was the most life-changing moment, what was the most important thing in your life up to this point, and I wrote LSD. Pretty succinct. A real short one.